The ink on his father's ledger was barely dry before the accusations began. "You're just a fortune hunter," the Duke of Ashbourne sneered, his gaze cutting like shattered glass. He thought he was banishing a parasite. He didn't know he was casting out the only woman holding his crumbling legacy together. The rain lashing against the towering, mullioned windows of Oakhaven Hall seemed a fitting accompaniment to Alistair Montgomery's dark mood. As the newly elevated 9th Duke of Ashbourne, he had returned from his military commission in India, not to a triumphant homecoming, but to a funeral shrouded in whispers in a grand estate steeped in decay. Oakhaven, for centuries the proud seat of the Montgomery family in Derbyshire, smelled of damp wool, beeswax, and secrets. Alistair sat behind his late father's massive mahogany desk in the library, a mountain of financial ledgers and unsent correspondence piled before him. His father, the 8th Duke, had been a man of grand appetites and notoriously poor judgment, a reality Alistair had suspected but never fully comprehended until he began sifting through the sprawling chaos of the estate's affairs. Yet there was one element of Oakhaven that disturbed Alistair far more than the unpaid bills from London tailors or the staggering accounts from local merchants. Her name was Clara Linwood. Clara was the orphaned daughter of an impoverished country vicar who had once served as the late Duke's closest confidant. 5 years ago, Alistair's father had taken the young woman in as a ward. Alistair, stationed thousands of miles away in Calcutta, had received only sparse, overly fond letters from his father praising Clara's comforting presence. To the cynical, battle-hardened Alistair, the situation screamed of manipulation. A pretty, destitute young woman ingratiating herself with an aging, wealthy aristocrat was a tale as old as the peerage itself. And now, reviewing the ledgers, Alistair found his grim suspicions confirmed. The door to the library clicked open. Clara Linwood stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with a pot of black tea. She wore a simple, unadorned gown of charcoal gray half-mooning for a man who was not even her blood relative. She was striking rather than beautiful, with sharp, intelligent hazel eyes, an aristocratic slope to her nose, and dark hair pulled back into a severe knot. There was a quiet, unshakable dignity about her that Alistair found profoundly irritating. It felt practiced. "I did not ask for tea, Miss Linwood," Alistair said coldly, not looking up from the ledger. "Mrs. Gable insisted, Your Grace," Clara replied, her voice smooth and remarkably steady. She set the tray down on a side table. "She was concerned you had not eaten since breakfast. The estate accounts are taxing." Alistair's head snapped up. "Taxing? Is that the word you choose to describe this wholesale butchery of my family's fortune?" He stood, pushing his chair back with a harsh scrape against the parquet floor. He grabbed a heavy, leather-bound book and tossed it onto the center of the desk. "Perhaps you can explain this to me, since you were my father's constant, devoted companion." Clara remained perfectly still, though a faint tightening of her jaw betrayed her tension. "I am not the estate steward, Your Grace, Mr. Mashed. Penhaligon handles the books, Mr. Egaz. Penhaligon is a doddering fool who rubber-stamped whatever my father commanded." Alistair shot back, stepping around the desk to close the distance between them. He towered over her, his imposing military frame designed to intimidate. "And it seems my father commanded quite a bit of wealth toward a specific, undocumented account. Hundreds of pounds transferred quarterly, the stipend. An allowance, the ledgers simply mark it as C.L. That would unravel his entire world. A rather brazen choice of initials, don't you think?" Clara's eyes flickered down to the ledger, then back up to his face. "Your Grace, you do not understand the nature of those transactions." "I understand them perfectly," Alistair sneered, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "I have seen women like you before. You seek out the old, the vulnerable, the desperate. You wrap them around your finger with sweet words and feigned devotion, all while siphoning their lifeblood into your own pockets. You saw an aging duke with a failing mind, and you saw a profound opportunity." "That is a lie," Clara stated. Her voice was quiet, but the sheer force of her conviction made it ring through the cavernous library. "I cared for your father because he was the only man who showed me kindness when I had nothing. I never took advantage of his condition, Then explain the money. Alistair roared, slamming his palm against the desktop. Explain the thousands of pounds missing from the agricultural yields. Explain why the tenant farms in the valley have been sold off, yet there is no record of the capital in the primary accounts. Did you plan to abscond to the continent? Were you waiting for the old man to finally die so you could disappear with my family's wealth? Clara looked at him, her hazel eyes suddenly devoid of warmth. She seemed to evaluate him, weighing a decision in her mind before a wall of icy resignation fell over her features. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. "You have been away a long time, Your Grace," she said softly. "You know nothing of this house, nothing of your father's final years, and clearly nothing of me." "I know enough," Alistair snarled. "You're just a fortune hunter. And your hunt is over. You have 24 hours to pack whatever you can carry in a single trunk. I am turning you out, Miss Linwood. If you are still on the grounds by tomorrow afternoon, I will have the magistrate forcibly remove you for theft." Clara held his furious gaze for a long, agonizing moment. "As you wish, Your Grace. I will be gone by morning." She turned on her heel and walked out of the library, her posture perfectly straight, leaving Alistair alone with his bitter victory. The morning of Clara's departure was bleak and bitterly cold. Alistair watched from the second-floor gallery window as a hired carriage rumbled down the long gravel drive, carrying the disgraced ward away from Oakhaven Hall. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The parasite had been excised. Now, he could begin the arduous task of saving his estate. His confidence lasted precisely 4 days. On the 5th day of his tenure as the Duke of Ashbourne, the true reality of Oakhaven Hall began to crash down around him with the violence of a collapsing mine shaft. It began with the coal merchants in the village of Ashford, who outright refused to deliver the winter supply to the hall. When Alistair rode down to confront them, demanding to know why the Duke of Ashbourne was being denied service, the merchant simply crossed his arms. "Because Miss Linwood ain't there to guarantee the coin, Your Grace. Your father's line of credit dried up 3 years ago. We only delivered because the young lady paid us in cash on the 1st of the month." Alistair had ridden back to the estate, unsettled but convinced it was a localized misunderstanding. The next morning, however, he was awoken by a frantic Mr. Penhaligon, the elderly estate steward. "Your Grace." "It is the bank, sir. Courts & Co." "In London," Penhaligon gasped, clutching his chest as he stood in the doorway of the breakfast room. "They have sent a courier. They are threatening foreclosure on the northern hunting lodges and the London townhouse." Alistair dropped his napkin, his stomach plummeting. "The closure? On what grounds?" "The mortgage on the townhouse was paid off by my grandfather." "It was remortgaged, Your Grace," Penhaligon whimpered, trembling. "To their father named. That would unravel his etched in hevel his entire world expansion. When the bubble burst, he lost everything, hundreds of thousands of pounds. He leveraged the entire estate to cover his initial losses, and then lost that as well." Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. "And the sea?" "Ill account," he whispered, dread coiling tight in his gut. "I brought the private box, Your Grace," Penhaligon said, gesturing to a heavy iron lockbox the footman had carried in. "Miss Linwood entrusted me with the key on the morning she left. She said I was to give it to you only when you asked for the truth." Alistair seized the key from the trembling steward and practically tore the lockbox open. Inside, it was not filled with hoarded jewels or stolen banknotes. It was filled with thick stacks of promissory notes, bank drafts, and letters of correspondence. His eyes scanned the top document. It was a letter from Lord Percival Stanton, the most ruthless debt collector in London, addressed to Clara Linwood. "Dear Miss Linwood, I have received your latest draft for £500, drawn from your maternal grandfather's trust at Baring's Bank. As agreed, I will delay the seizure of the Oakhaven tenant farms for another quarter. I must confess your dedication to a man who ruined his own fortune is baffling. But your money is good. The Duke remains blissfully ignorant of his ruin, thanks entirely to your silent patronage." Alistair stopped breathing. His hands began to shake as he dug deeper into the box. There were dozens of letters, receipts for the staff's wages, vouchers for the roof repairs in the East Wing, bills from the apothecary for his father's expensive laudanum prescriptions. Every single one was paid in full, countersigned by Clara Linwood. He found a sealed envelope at the very bottom, bearing his name in Clara's elegant, sweeping script. He tore it open with clumsy fingers. "Your Grace, by the time you read this, the illusion your father lived within will have shattered. I did not hide the truth from you to steal from your family, but to protect an old, broken man from dying in the debtor's prison he rightly belonged in. My maternal grandfather left me a substantial independent fortune in his will, untouched by my father's poverty. When the Duke lost everything in the railway panic, his mind began to fracture. He could not comprehend that he was destitute. He still ordered grand dinners, bought thoroughbred horses, and commissioned portraits. To deny him would have forced him to face a reality that his fragile heart could not endure. The C.L. account you found was not money I was taking from the estate. It was money I was transferring from my own inheritance into Oakhaven's coffers to cover the massive, gaping holes your father left behind. The tenant farms were sold to me, anonymously, so the Crown would not seize them. The money you thought I stole was my own capital, keeping the wolves from your door. I did not ask for gratitude. I only wished to grant an old man peace in his final days. I leave Oakhaven with nothing, for I have spent every penny of my inheritance keeping your ancestral home standing. You have your estate, Your Grace. I hope it brings you more warmth than you have shown me. C. Linwood." The letter slipped from Alistair's fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. He stood frozen, the magnitude of his catastrophic error crashing over him. She was not a fortune hunter. She was the sole architect of his salvation. She had beggared herself to save a family she owed nothing to, enduring the terrible burden of his father's ruin in absolute, agonizing silence. And Alistair, blinded by his own arrogant, aristocratic prejudice, had thrown her out into the cold with nothing but the clothes on her back. "Penhaligon," Alistair choked out, his voice cracking as he looked up at the horrified steward. The dupe's face was pale, his eyes wide with an unspeakable hollow panic. "Where did the carriage take her?" "I do not know, Your Grace," Penhaligon stammered. "She mentioned seeking a position as a governess in Yorkshire, but she had very little money left for the journey. She may not have made it past London." Alistair bypassed the table, knocking his chair to the floor. He didn't care about the mud, the rain, or the dignity of his title. "Saddle my horse," the Duke bellowed to the bewildered footman in the hall, sprinting toward the grand foyer. "Saddle my horse immediately." The Great North Road was a treacherous ribbon of mud and deep carriage ruts, transformed into a quagmire by an unrelenting November downpour. Alistair Montgomery rode with the reckless, single-minded desperation of a cavalry officer charging enemy line. He traded his ceremonial aristocratic garments for a heavy woolen riding coat, his face plastered with freezing rain and soot. His military career in the 33rd Regiment of Foot had taught him how to track men through the dense, unforgiving jungles of Bengal. But tracking one impoverished woman through the bustling, chaotic arteries of Victorian England proved an entirely different kind of agony. He stopped at every major coaching inn between Derbyshire and Yorkshire. At the George and Stamford, a weary ostler remembered a woman in a charcoal dress boarding a northbound stage. At the Angel and Royal in Grantham, a barmaid recalled a pale passenger who had traded a silver locket, the very locket Alistair's father had given Clara on her 20th birthday, just to secure a meager portion of bread and a cup of thin broth. With every new piece of information, the knot of suffocating guilt in Alistair's chest pulled tighter. She was liquidating her final sentimental possessions just to survive the exile he had forced upon her. By the time Alistair's exhausted gelding limped into the ancient walled city of York, the sun had vanished behind a thick canopy of coal smoke. The sprawling industrial hub was a labyrinth of narrow, claustrophobic streets and towering brick factories. Using the last clue he had wrung from a stagecoach driver, Alistair found himself navigating the treacherous alleys near the Shambles, an area where the timber-framed buildings leaned so far forward they nearly blotted out the sky. He finally halted before a decrepit boarding house on Micklegate. The sign above the door, belonging to a Mrs. Agatha Higgins, swung on a single rusted hinge. It was a place for the truly desperate factory workers, ruined clerks, and those with nowhere else to fall. Alistair pushed through the warped wooden door, the smell of boiled cabbage and damp rot assaulting his senses. He tossed a heavy silver crown onto the front desk, startling the proprietor. "A woman arrived here yesterday," Alistair demanded, his voice carrying the sharp, unyielding edge of command. "Dark hair, grey dress, traveling alone under the name Linwood. Where is she?" The landlady, eyeing the silver coin with greedy apprehension, pointed a trembling finger toward the narrow, creaking staircase. "Top floor. Last door on the left, sir. But she ain't well." Caught a terrible chill on the road. Alistair didn't wait for permission. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heavy boots thundering against the rotting wood. He reached the top-floor landing and strode to the final door. He did not knock. He pushed the door open, the flimsy latch giving way with a pathetic snap. The room was scarcely larger than a closet. A single soot-stained window looked out onto a brick wall. There was no fire in the tiny grate. Sitting on the edge of a narrow, lumpy cot, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, was Clara. She looked up, startled by the intrusion. Her face was chalk-white, shadows bruised beneath her hazel eyes, and she was shivering violently. When she recognized the towering figure filling the doorway, a flash of pure, unguarded terror crossed her features, quickly replaced by a mask of cold, brittle defiance. "Have you come to ensure I haven't stolen the silver from the coaching inns, Your Grace?" Clara's voice was hoarse, a jagged whisper that tore at Alistair's conscience. "Or did the magistrate require a physical inspection of my meager belongings?" Alistair stepped into the room, gently closing the door behind him to shut out the noise of the boarding house. He took off his sodden hat, his hands trembling slightly. "I opened the lockbox, Clara." The use of her Christian name made her flinch. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, breaking his gaze to stare at the cold, empty fireplace. "Then you know. The tenant farms are secure for another month. The railway debts are temporarily pacified. You have your grand estate, Duke of Ashbourne. Why are you here?" "Because I am a blind, arrogant fool," Alistair said, his voice breaking. The aristocratic pride that had defined his family for centuries shattered in that damp, freezing room. He crossed the short distance between them and, to Clara's profound shock, dropped heavily to his knees on the dirty floorboards. He was a duke of the realm, kneeling in the muck of a York slum. "I saw a fortune hunter because that is what my cynical mind expected to see. I never considered that I was looking at a savior." Clara stared down at him, her chest heaving as a ragged cough shook her frame. "I did not do it to be a savior. I did it because your father, for all his foolish hubris during the railway mania of '46, was the only gentleman who did not turn me away when my own father died penniless. My grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, was a merchant who made a quiet fortune in the Baltic timber trade. He left it to me, safely hidden in Baring's Bank, away from my father's debts. When I saw Oakhaven bleeding to death, I merely paid my debt of gratitude. But that debt is now paid in full. I am destitute, Alistair. I gave you everything. Leave me in peace." "I will not," Alistair said fiercely, reaching out to gently take her freezing hands in his warm ones. "You did not just save the stones of Oakhaven, Clara. You saved my family's honor when we did not deserve it. I have come to take you home." "Home?" Clara let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "Oakhaven is not my home. It is a monument to a lie I can no longer afford to maintain." Before Alistair could formulate a response, heavy, aggressive footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. The door was kicked open, slamming hard against the peeling wallpaper. 2 men stepped into the cramped room. The first was a massive, scarred brute who looked like a London enforcer. The second was a sharply dressed, weasel-faced man holding a leather satchel, Mr. 8. Arthur Grimsby, the chief collections agent for Lord Percival Stanton. Grimsby's eyes darted around the room, settling on Clara with a predatory gleam, entirely ignoring the man kneeling on the floor, assuming him to be a fellow resident of the slums. "Miss Linwood," Grimsby sneered, stepping forward. "Lord Stanton sends his regards. We were quite distressed to hear you fled Oakhaven." You see, the draft you sent for the final quarter's interest on the Grand Trunk Railway loans was drawn on an empty account. Baring's Bank rejected it. Your grandfather's trust is dry, which means you are personally liable for the remaining £5,000. Clara shrank back against the wall, her face draining of whatever colour remained. I wrote to Lord Stanton. I explained I had no more capital. The debt belongs to the Ashbourne estate. The estate is heavily entailed and protected by an army of solicitors, Grimsby countered smoothly. But you, Miss Linwood, sign as the guarantor on the bridge loans to protect the Duke. You took the liability onto yourself to shield him. A very noble, very stupid decision. Since you cannot pay, Lord Stanton has secured a warrant for your arrest. You will rot in the Fleet prison until the debt is magically satisfied. Grimsby nodded to the brute. Take her. The enforcer lunged forward. He never reached the bed. Alistair rose from the floor with the terrifying speed of a coiled spring. He caught the enforcer by the lapels of his heavy coat, twisted his hips, and drove the man brutally into the brick wall. The sickening crack of the enforcer's skull hitting the masonry echoed in the small room. The giant slumped to the floor, unconscious before he even realized he had been struck. Grimsby shrieked, dropping his leather satchel and scrambling backward toward the door. Alistair stepped over the unconscious thug, his eyes blazing with a lethal aristocratic fury. He reached into his coat and withdrew a heavy, silver-barreled percussion pistol, leveling it directly at the terrified debt collector's chest. You seem to be laboring under a severe misapprehension, Mr. Grimsby, Alistair said, his voice dangerously soft. You have not cornered a helpless woman. You have trespassed on the privacy of the Duke of Ashbourne, and you have threatened someone under my absolute, unwavering protection. Grimsby's jaw dropped, his eyes darting from the gun to Alistair's hard, unrelenting face. Your Grace, I had no idea. Silence, Alistair commanded. You will return to London. You will tell Lord Percival Stanton that if he ever sends a man to harass this woman again, I will not send solicitors. I will come to his Mayfair townhouse myself, and I will dismantle him. The debt belongs to my house. I will assume all liabilities immediately. Have his bankers contact Coupton Co. by the end of the week. Now get out of my sight before I decide a bullet is cheaper than a bribe. Grimsby didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled over his unconscious companion and bolted down the stairs, leaving the satchel behind. The room fell into a heavy, stunning silence. Clara stared at Alistair, her chest heaving. She had spent 5 years dealing with a duke who hid from his problems, weeping in his study while she fought the wolves at the door. Now she was looking at a duke who met the wolves head-on and broke their jaws. Alistair carefully lowered the hammer on his pistol and tucked it away. He turned back to Clara, his expression softening entirely. He sat on the edge of the cot beside her. You took my father's debts into your own name, he asked, his voice thick with emotion. You risked debtor's prison for a family that threw you out into the rain. I couldn't let them take the estate, Clara whispered, a tear finally escaping and cutting a path through the soot on her cheek. I couldn't let your legacy be destroyed. My legacy is nothing but stone and arrogance without you, Alistair replied softly. He reached into his coat again, bringing out a thick, sealed envelope. I have my military pension, Clara, and I have an unentailed, profitable copper mine in Cornwall that my mother left me. It is enough to satisfy Stanton and stabilize Oakhaven's immediate ledgers. We are not entirely ruined. He looked deeply into her eyes, seeing the brilliant, terrifying intellect and the boundless, selfless courage that resided there. I do not want you to return to Oakhaven as my ward, Clara. I do not want you to hide in the shadows, balancing books and protecting my pride. I need your mind. I need your strength. He took her hand again, pressing it to his lips. I want you to return as my equal, as my partner, as the Duchess of Ashbourne. Clara gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Alistair, I have nothing. I am an impoverished vicar's daughter. You are the woman who outmaneuvered the London banks, held off the greatest debt collectors in England, and saved my ancestral home. Alistair corrected her, a small, genuine smile breaking through his serious demeanor. You are the wealthiest woman I have ever known, Clara. In every way that truly matters, marry me. Let us rebuild Oakhaven together. Looking at the fierce devotion in the eyes of the man who had ridden through hell to find her, Clara's defenses finally crumbled. She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. Together. When the carriage finally rolled back up the sweeping gravel drive of Oakhaven Hall 3 days later, the staff gathered on the steps, expecting to see their disgraced ward returning in shame. Instead, they watched as the Duke of Ashbourne stepped down into the crisp winter air and turned to offer his hand. He did not hand down a ward. He handed down his soon-to-be Duchess, the undisputed master of the estate, who had finally stepped out of the shadows to claim the home she had already bought and paid for with her own brilliant, unrelenting courage. Every crumbling empire needs a savior, but true strength lies in recognizing the hands that hold the stones together. Alistair and Clara's story proves that the greatest fortunes aren't inherited. They are forged in fire, trust, and undeniable love. If you were captivated by this tale of betrayal, sacrifice, and redemption, please hit the like button, share this story with a fellow romantic, and subscribe to our channel for more.